Hey guys, Non-Zero here, coach of the Pittsburgh Celesteela, bringing you my draft analysis for the Royal Battle Association. So the RBA is a draft league with 16 teams. There's going to be a regular season followed by playoffs, so that should be pretty fun. The draft itself was a tiered draft, so between the fact that there were 16 teams and the fact that it's a tiered draft, there was definitely a lot of competition for the Mons, which are considered, I guess, more competitively viable in this format. So as a result of this, we ended up having to be a little creative with our picks, especially towards the end, but I am pretty content with the draft that I ended up with. I think it definitely has the potential to put in some work this season. So let's go ahead and jump into the picks. So for the first round pick, Tapu Koko is still on the table, and it was really tempting just to go with the same type of draft style that had worked out for me really well so far in the DGBA, which is the other draft I'm currently doing. But being new to the draft league format, I wanted to test out a couple of different draft styles, and so I really wanted to try to build around this mon, and that mon is Purim Black. So this thing is a monster. It has a base stat total of 700, with rocking an insanely high 170 base attack. It has pretty strong dual stabs. It does kind of lack a physical ice stab, which is one of the things that holds it back, but special attack is definitely solid, and it does get access, of course, to Ice Beam. And it gets access to some nice coverage as well in Fusion Bolt, Iron Head, Zen Headbutt, Earth Power, and those type of moves. So the main things that hold this mon back are, one, its speed tier. 95 is decent, but it's not the best. There are a lot of things that outspeed it and take advantage of the second thing that's holding this guy back, which is its 5 weaknesses. And one of the especially unfortunate weaknesses is a weakness to Stealth Rocks. But even with both of those things holding it back, it can definitely put in a lot of work. It's a terrifying mon to try to switch into, and this mon definitely appreciates good team support and reliable hazard removal, and slow U-turns or volt switches to get it in safely. This thing is pretty bulky though, can take a couple of hits, and has recovery in Roost, so a sub-Roost set is also something you might see me running later this season. But in any case, that is my first mon. Let's go ahead and jump into my second mon. My second mon is going to be Jirachi. So Jirachi is a really cool mon in the draft. I really wanted to add it to the team. It synergizes quite well with Purim Black, both offensively and defensively. Defensively, they don't share any weakness, and Jirachi just is a very good supporter to the team. It gives me some mon with Wish support, has access to Healing Wish, has access to Stealth Rocks. It has a huge move pool that includes stuff like the Elemental Punches, nice dual stabs both from the physical and special side, and just a whole lot of moves in general for my opponent to prepare for. My Jirachi is the mon that I ended up going with as my first Z Crystal user. Another rule for this draft was that you could have up to 1 Mega Pokemon, and you could have up to 2 mons that you declared as your Z Crystal users, so mons that you could potentially bring to battle carrying a Z Crystal. And so Jirachi was the first one there. I had been considering Purim Black, but I ended up later in the draft coming up with a mon that I thought could utilize the Z Crystal somewhat more effectively than Purim Black. And also Purim Black, I anticipate me bringing something like a Scarf set or a defensive leftover set more often than I'd want to necessarily bring a Z Crystal set. And so in any case, yeah, Jirachi just gives the team a whole lot of versatility. It is definitely a pain to prepare for. It's up there with Mew and mons that are just very difficult to prepare for fully because it just gets so much coverage and there's so many things it can do. So moving on to my round 3 pick, and you'll see that I'm actually picking these more or less in order, and that is going to be the trend for this draft. I picked the higher tier mons first, with one exception, but we'll come to that later. And the reason behind that is because the higher tier mons are the mons I anticipate me bringing most often to the battles, so I think that those are sort of the ones that are most important for me to get what fits well with the team. So anyway, onto my first tiered B draft pick. This mon is a mon that's in the same kind of genre as Purim B in terms of what it's used for. That is Nidoqueen. So it's another one of those mons. It's not the fastest thing in the world, but it just hits really hard. It's very difficult to switch into this monster. And other than the Life Orb Sheer Force set, with Sludge Wave, Earth Power, and something from Ice Beam, Flamethrower, and Thunderbolt, This thing also gets access to Stealth Rocks and Toxic Spikes, and so it can run more of a defensive set if that's necessary. It can also run a physical set. This thing did get a buff in the previous generation. It got 10 extra base attack, and that means that its physical move pool, which includes the elemental punches and poison jab, is not at all bad. With 92 base attack, this thing can definitely put in some work from the physical side of things. To give you an idea, one might think that something like an Assault Vest Goodra would take on a mon like Nidoqueen, because from the special set, an Ice Beam is doing maybe 20%, but if this thing is running a physical set, then Ice Punch just straight one-shots max HP Goodra. So it can definitely take advantage of Life Orb Sheer Force from the physical side as well. And I could see myself bringing that, where I feel that they'll have one of their specially defensive mons tailored to take this thing on. So that's Nidoqueen, and let's move right along to my 4th round pick, which is going to be Silvally. Now I picked Silvally because I really wanted to take advantage of one of the main 2 things that Silvally has going for it, and that is access to Parting Shot. I think Parting Shot is just so good in this metagame in the Draft League because not only does it generate momentum, but it also hinders the opponent's mon that's in. So whether the opponent switches or stays in, they're going to have a -1 attack and -1 special attack. I think Parting Shot into mons like Nidoqueen and Purim Black, which really appreciate the physical and special attack drops from Parting Shot, is just really good for this team so far. So it synergizes really well with the first 3. And also, it gives me just another mon that's so very versatile. Because of its ability RKS system, I can tailor this thing to be a defensive check to just about anything. So what Silvally also does is if my opponent has a mon that the rest of my team is really weak to, I can just tailor this thing to take that mon on. So that's going to be my 4th pick. I think Silvally is just really great in the format, and I really liked him for the type of team that I'm drafting, which is kind of a team of mons that are difficult to switch into, not necessarily the fastest, but a lot of mons that are just difficult to switch into. Now for my 5th round pick, I was planning on picking up Galvantula. I had said from the beginning that round 5 was when I was going to draft Galvantula before it got scooped up. Unfortunately, just a few picks before me, someone did scoop up Galvantula, so round 5 was a little bit late, and I wanted Galvantula so much because it does get access to Sticky Webs and Momentum, but because Galvantula is picked up now, I ended up just drafting a different Sticky Webs user somewhat later on in the draft, and so we'll get to that a bit later. But in any case, for my next pick, I picked something from Tier C, and this was a bit of an interesting pick. When I had picked this, I decided that I wanted my team to have a Sun mode. I wanted to try a Sun mode out. I've seen a lot in draft format rain modes, but I haven't seen too much Sun modes been used successfully, and I think there are a lot of mons that could potentially function really well in the Sun, and there are also a lot of new tools this generation that sort of help Sun mons out. So for my 5th pick, I went with Mega Houndoom. Now Mega Houndoom, not necessarily the best Mega, but what it does give me is it gives me a nice 115 speed tier. It gives me a very, very solid special attacker. This thing does have a base 140 special attack after Mega Evolution. And it also gives me something that's just absolutely a monster in the Sun, which is sort of the core of my Sun mode that I'm going to end up drafting for this team. Now why does this thing appreciate the Sun? Well, its ability Solar Power means that it gets a 1.5 times special attack boost in the Sun in exchange for taking 1/8 of its HP each turn. So that means that this thing hits like significantly harder than Zard Y when the Sun is up, especially with its fire moves. And we all know how hard Zard Y is to switch into, and this thing also does get access to Solar Beam, which is really important so it can hit those bulky water types. Unfortunately, it doesn't get access to Focus Blast, which it would really appreciate. And in general, this thing's coverage is not the greatest, but it does get access to Destiny Bond, which I think is also really cool. So if I think I'm about to go down, say if I'm using this thing mid-game, then I can take something with me. So I think this mon is really solid. I think it's maybe underestimated in the draft format because I haven't seen it being used that often. I was considering at this point drafting Mega Ampharos and going sort of a different direction with my draft, but I decided against Mega Ampharos. I just didn't think that it fit my team really well. I really wanted the speed and the power that this thing gave me, so That's why I went with Mega Houndoom. Now at this point you might notice a bit of a ground weakness. Jirachi, Nidoqueen, and Mega Houndoom all being weak to ground, and you having no ground immunities so far unless I'm making Silvally a flying type. So my next pick, I wanted something that could handle ground types pretty well, and I went ahead and picked up Gyarados. I think Gyarados really does fit very well on this team. It has access to some solid coverage moves in Earthquake, Iron Head, Waterfall, and Bounce. And it can be a decent Dragon Dance sweeper, it can be a decent Choice Scarf Moxie sweeper late game. It can be more of a defensive set with Substitute and Leftovers and Rest, that sort of thing. There's definitely a lot of things this thing can do. Now of course, the 4 times weakness to Electric is holding it back, because it always has to worry about my opponent randomly packing Hidden Power Electric on one of their Mons. But I think this thing can still definitely put in some work, having access to Intimidate and being able to hit them pretty hard with Waterfalls coming from a base 130 attack. So definitely like Gyarados for this team so far, and I think it could definitely put in some work late game if I manage to, weaken my opponent's bulky water or bulky grass types, things that could take this on. Okay, so for my next pick, I went ahead and picked my other tier C pick. So you notice I picked one of my picks from tier D just because I didn't want Gyarados to be scooped up from someone else. I felt it fit too well in the team for me to risk that. And in any case, my round 7 pick ended up being Whimsicott. This is actually the Mon that I made my second Z Crystal user. So my first designated Z Crystal user is Jirachi, and my second is Whimsicott. And the reason for that is there are a lot of interesting things this guy can do with Z moves. Probably the most notable of these is Z Memento, which is like a Healing Wish plus a Memento. And I think that's just very, very good for this team, because I have a lot of Mons like Purim Black, Nidoqueen, which can get easily worn down and which really would appreciate a Z Memento, allowing them to get right back up to full HP. And now, in addition to Z Memento, this thing also gets access to a whole lot of very nice support moves in Tailwind, Encore, Switcheroo, Sunny Day, which really helps out with my rain mode, having a Prankster Sunny Day, and Trick Room. And I'll get back to Trick Room a little bit later. You might be thinking, well, I don't really have much to abuse Trick Room on my team. All in all, I think this Mon can definitely fit well on my team. It does give me a grass type. It does complete both my Fire, Water, Grass, and my Dragon Fairy Steel cores, which is definitely a cool thing. And it just is another one of those Mons that can be quite versatile. It can run an offensive set. It is rather fast with a 116 base speed and a decent special attack. It can run more of a defensive sub-seed set, which can be really, really annoying for my opponent to handle. And generally, I think it just gives me some nice defensive and offensive synergy with the members of my team so far. Alright, let's go ahead and hop into my next pick. So for my next pick, I was really, really debating. So let's go ahead and jump into my 8th pick. Now my 8th pick, I ended up going for Medicham. This thing hits hard, and I can pretty much stop talking about it there because that's the extent of what this thing does. It just hits with pure power, of course, doubling its attack stat. Slap a Choice Scarf on this thing, and it is very, very difficult to switch into. This Mon, of course, gets access to very strong dual stabs in High Jump Kick and Zen Headbutt. Also gets some nice coverage in the Elemental Punches, as well as some priority in Bullet Punch and Fake Out. But mainly, this thing is just here to hit hard, and it is here to have very, very few switch-ins from my opponent. It is definitely something that my opponent needs to prep for, because otherwise a Scarf Medicham can just run rampant through teams. Alright, so for the next Mon, you might notice that so far I have 0 hazard removal. And this was a Mon as soon as I drafted Medicham that I was just hoping would stay around until my next turn. And it actually did stay around, so I was quite happy with that. That Mon is Flygon, so I think this thing just fits really, really well on my team. It gives me another electric immunity, which is really important, and it gives me a very, very solid defogger. I honestly think that Flygon is one of the best defoggers in the game, because it's naturally immune to all hazards that are on the ground because of Levitate, so it's not going to take the negative effects of, say, Toxic Spikes or Sticky Webs, and it's also resisting rocks. And I think it's maybe the only Mon that could defog that has both of those properties, resisting rocks and being immune to Ground Hazard. And so I think this thing is a really reliable defogger because of that. It's also decently bulky. It gets base 80 defenses as well as base 100 speed and attack, which is unremarkable but is solid. It can definitely function offensively as well. It does get access to Dragon Dance, so it can be a late game sweeper potentially if enough things have been worn down. It can run Choice Scarf, Outrage. It can run U-Turn, so it gives me another nice source of momentum. And in general, I think this thing is just a really good fit for the team. Alright, so now let's move on to my last two picks. So my round 10 and my round 11 picks are both from tier E, and tier E just means anything not on the ban list and anything not in tiers A through D. So there are a ton of mons to choose from, but I already had two specific mons in mind that I wanted, so I ended up picking up for my round 10 pick a Torkoal. So Torkoal is a mon that gets access to Drought. It had that buff this generation, so it gives me another member of my Sun Core, something that can actually just naturally set up the Sun, and with the Heat Rock make it last for a long time. It also gives me something against opposing weather. That's one of the reasons I wanted to try out a weather mode. Also because I think that having your own weather mode is one of the best ways to approach an encounter versus an opponent's weather mode. But in any case, Torkoal is as slow as molasses. That is definitely the case. It just doesn't outpace anything except for like Pyukumuku, and that's about it. But for that reason, now remember I mentioned earlier that Whimsicott gets Trick Room. I think that this thing can definitely potentially be a potent Trick Room sweeper. Even though it doesn't have the best special attack, when you combine the coverage of a single target eruption in the sun and also Solar Beam to hit the water types, this thing can definitely have potential, especially late game under Trick Room. And so one way that could potentially work, just as an example, is I could be running a Trick Room Whimsicott set. Say my Whimsicott has something like Focus Sash, Trick Room, and then either U-Turn or Memento. Then what can happen is it can set up Trick Room, and the next turn it can either Memento or get off a really slow U-Turn under Trick Room to bring this thing in safely, so that it can just start wrecking lives. And so that's just a potential thing that can definitely, against the right type of team, be very effective. And Torkoal under Trick Room is one of the nightmares of someone playing VGC, and it's also very potent in singles, if you're able to pull off getting the Torkoal actually in Trick Room. Alright, so for my last mon, I had mentioned a lot earlier that I really wanted Sticky Webs, because I think Sticky Webs are just so good for this team. And so for the next mon, I had been considering whether to choose this mon or to choose Smeargle. And it was a really tough choice because Smeargle does do a lot of things for my team just by virtue of its versatility. It could, for example, give me another form of hazard removal, but I ended up going with a different choice. I ended up choosing Leavanny as my last pick. Leavanny, definitely not something you see in Draft League format every day, but it does get access to Sticky Webs, and it does get access to the ability Chlorophyll. So this thing gives me another option for sweeping under the sun. From the physical side, one of the things that's holding this guy back is that it doesn't get access to U-Turn. It is a physical bug type that for whatever reason can't learn U-Turn, but it does get Baton Pass, so there's at least something, but it would just be so much better if it did get access to U-Turn. Of course, this thing being Grass and Bug, not the best defensive typing in the world, having 2-4 times weaknesses, a whole lot of other regular weaknesses, and not so many resistances, as well as not the best bulk. But the main thing that this thing will be brought for, I think, is either as a Chlorophyll sweeper, as a mon that can set up Sticky Webs, or potentially both. I think as a Chlorophyll sweeper, this mon actually does have potential to put in a little bit of work. For example, if my opponent doesn't have so much priority, and I manage to eliminate the priority they do have, then late game, a Focus Sash, Chlorophyll, Leavanny under the sun can definitely put in some work, because this thing does get access to Sword Stance, and has some decent stab in Leaf Blade from the physical side, or even Solar Beam from the special side. So that is Leavanny, closing out a bit of an unconventional last two picks for this team, but I think they can definitely work well. If I find that my Sun Core in Mega Houndoom, Torkoal, and Leavanny are sort of not able to function as much as I think they might, then I will be able to trade them off. I do get 3 free agent transactions over the course of the season. So I am prepared, if these things just fall completely flat, to go for drafting a couple of more bulky mons, because as you can see, I'm kind of lacking switch-ins to just about everything, but this is a bit of more of an offensive draft, and I definitely think it's going to be a lot of fun this season to play with. And so that's going to be the team. I really like how it looks. I like the sun mode. I think that could definitely put in some work. I think sticky webs are really great because my opponent basically has to prepare for sticky web. One of the reasons I liked drafting sticky webs for my last round pick is because it really restricts my opponent's team building. If you let sticky webs get up on the field and you have nothing for it, then mons like Medicham and Nidoqueen and Purim Black just have a field day. So in that sense, it restricts my opponent's team building, which I think is very valuable. But in any case, that's going to be the team. I'm really looking forward to playing with it this season, and that's going to be all for this video. So I'll see you guys in just a little bit, because later tonight I will be uploading the round 1 team builder and match analysis, so look forward to that. But anyway, this is Non-Zero. I'm signing out for now. See you guys later.